The future of product isn't just about features, it's also about building systems that move markets, anticipate human behavior, and turn bold ideas into global impact. Today's guest is a hands-on global product leader who has shaped customer journeys at two of the world's most influential tech companies. From redefining seller trust and loyalty for millions at Amazon to leading billions of dollars in product at Booking.com and scaling teams across product, marketing, user experience, analytics, and engineering, we're welcoming Deborah Clarke. CTRL-F podcast is for the ambitious, analytical, and quietly rebellious. We decode how top minds in finance and tech think, decide, and win beyond what school or the job ever taught. Welcome, Deborah Clarke.
Cheers. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
Yeah, and super excited about Control-F, just more generally. I think, when we think about Control-F as a concept, it's finding, something in chaos,
yes.
Right? And I think that's a lot of what leadership is about.
It is. Trying to get some kind of really distinguish the signal from the noise, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And
efficiently.
Yes.
Efficiently and at scale.
And I think that's a good segue because I think asking you about, so who is kind of Deborah Clarke when we talk about beyond the job titles and the portfolios? And if you had to tell a professional story through energy, intention, and any kind of pivot points that you've had, what would stand out?
Yeah. So maybe you can tell from what I'm wearing today. I'm a hugely creative person. So I love film and photography and art. Did my bachelor's degree actually in art, believe it or not. Obviously at a liberal arts school, so had the full rounded education and whatnot, but it's something that I'm deeply passionate about. And that's led to a lot of creative decisions in my career. And I would say maybe in another life, I'd be a film producer or something like that, right? There's a deep passion for that storytelling and that creative take on the world around me, which has led me into the domain of products. I would say pivot points and where I began. So I began more as a marketeer. So I worked, my first main core job in the professional sphere was in arts house publishing. So worked in publishing and arts journalism, and then I moved into finance of all places and did marketeering roles there. And then really pivoted post my MBA into where I feel like I found, I suppose, my puzzle piece in product.
Right.
And if we think back on the thread of that, it was about customer obsession. So initially, I think the early path of my career was okay, how do I understand who these people are, what it is that they want, and how do I figure out what products or services that they might want as a function of that? And then as we move into product, we get very much into the same dialogue about what those customers need and what they want, but then moving into, oh, okay, well, hang on, I get to create that thing. I get to build that thing.
Right.
So yeah, it's the place where I feel the best, I suppose. Yeah.
And this inherent sensibility around kind of wanting to kind of deal with, let's say, engage customers and kind of have that kind of customer kind of experience. That was kind of, it was always there kind of, let's say, early on.
Yeah.
Does that stem from anything?
Even in my arts education, I got deeply frustrated by sort of the more contemporary artists where I felt like it was super inaccessible, right? And I admired more of the artists that were doing things in the public art space where you could sort of understand what something meant when you actually saw it. And you didn't need some sort of higher level or elite education to understand it. I don't know. There's something about if we're going to create something, let's do it for the greater good and the people around us. And let's understand what those needs are and why they're meaningful so that we can make our lives more meaningful.
Listen, it's really well put. And I guess naturally to ask, in terms of your person as a professional, are you a very structured, very disciplined person? Are you more intuitive? Are you more kind of at the seat of your pants, kind of just engaging and doing things can just feel kind of intuitively right to you? How would you describe?
Yeah. So I think I've always been, let's say, a bit more intuitive. I've been lucky enough to sort of, even in the early stages of my life, be nominated for kind of leadership roles. And so I was captain of my swim team, nominated to be class representative, led the honor society in high school, these sorts of things. I just became this sort of natural nominee, and I've always been very ambitious and do well at school, do well in sports, all these kinds of things. And I sort of don't give up. I've got that sort of relentless spirit, I suppose. But I genuinely believe that like the structure and the discipline is what comes with scale and wanting to scale yourself. You know, a lot of leadership is about how do you motivate sort of a group or cohort of people to believe in a common goal, right? And like you can't do that by not understanding what that common goal is, not being able to articulate it, not being able to storytell, not being able to creatively come up with what motivates those people to do those things. And that requires structure.
And that kind of scaling, and I guess how you've kind of evolved professionally, kind of with the scale and responsibility, you see a direct correlation around how that has kind of
yeah. But even like when I've joined new companies and that kind of thing, I've found that, you know, you almost have to discipline yourself, right? Because you sort of land into an environment that's chaotic and you don't understand it. You don't speak the same language. You don't have that culture. You're not part of the group yet. Right. And to figure out, right, how do I go after a thing in a world of lots of things, especially coming in as a leader when you've got big teams and big organizations, you have to create that structure and discipline for yourself to be able to learn those things. Otherwise, you're just constantly in firefighting mode, or I don't fully understand, or you're not able to make good decisions. And so, I would say not just for myself, but obviously organizations as well.
And of course, I know maybe we'll get to this today, just in terms of your own background, your own personal history. I mean, given where you've come from, I mean, you're an American, you've lived in different parts of Europe. I mean, I guess all those elements did really, I guess, give you some of the, I guess, maybe the baseline and the strength to kind of want to deal with some of these cross-cultural challenges and these different ecosystems that you've thrown yourself into.
Yeah, it's a great pivot into, I would say, like one of those formative memories that I have, or those journeys that I had early on. So when I graduated from undergrad, I got the opportunity through the French embassy and the French foreign ministry to go over and sort of take, in some ways, a year out, right? So it was like they were looking to have native English speakers teach and guide French people in underfunded schools and underfunded public schools towards an appreciation and understanding of the English language with native English speakers. And when I first arrived, it was like, I mean, I spoke French, but like not like that.
Not like that. Right.
You know, when your toilet breaks week 2 and you don't know the vocabulary, it gets interesting. And then, you know, you walk into this room full of students and you're in this incredibly humbling position of students laughing at your accent, the way that you say things. You made a mistake here or there, and they don't, you know, they might not even understand what you're saying. And you're standing in front of a room full of school children that you're trying to teach and trying to grow an appreciation for the language. And that was deeply humbling, to say the least.
Yes.
But you also have to then, within that space, earn trust and earn respect from those students, make it valuable use of their time. You know, you come in there, like the French teacher of those classrooms would leave. So I had to discipline the room and teach the room and get them excited about the topic that they were going to be discussing. And that was just like inherently one of those very unique experiences where you are completely out of your comfort zone. Nothing's familiar. You're being mocked and you are trying to also command respect. And so it's like how you climb out of that and how you live with that. I found so many parallels, even in joining these large scale organizations where I don't speak the language. You know, they're using acronyms right, left, and center. Like folks have their own little groups. They have their own little, you know, ways of doing things. You might ask a stupid question. You know, we all say, oh, sorry to ask a stupid question. You know, you sort of feel that like intimidation and discomfort, but you have to overcome that, you know, especially if you're going to transition in your career, if you're going to continue to grow. So some of those experiences earlier on, I would say, got me comfortable with the uncomfortable, if that makes sense.
And I think also like actually finally arriving in the Netherlands, where I think humility for us expats is a real, it's a key thing to have. But if you looking back on your 20s and 30s, or looking back, you know, in your early professional life, were there any defining moments you think that kind of led you to think to how you've become what you've become at this point?
Yeah, like I think that one that I just spoke about was one of them. Like it was, that component of language is the system that helps you to communicate and connect with people. And when you are in the sort of basic zone of having not really fully understood like a situation or not being familiar with what you have in front of you, and you have to overcome that and you have to earn the respect. There are different practices and tools of the trade that I've learned to replicate that in all of these different environments. I mean, I'll be honest, when I first started in Amazon, it was like everybody was speaking a foreign language. I literally, for the first 6 months, I felt like such an imposter. But then after 6 months of learning the language, it was like silk. You just knew.
Wow.
You knew what you were doing.
Wow.
And it was amazing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then I've been in other companies where they've never actually figured out what their language is. And so you got people speaking Greek and French and Japanese and whatever's going on. And then you're trying to find like a common thread and ways to commonly represent what it is that we're talking about.
And I guess this homogeneity that you're kind of talking about within the context of Amazon, that became when you really were able to kind of feel that was a silk road forward for you.
Yeah.
That you could just flow.
Super strong. You knew what you were doing. You knew the mechanisms to get there. You still like the work became creative for the right reasons, like for the customers, and less so I need to reinvent this wheel and I need to redo this thing and I need to come up with a different way of doing this thing all over again. So yeah, it was super efficient, which they're known for. Yeah.
Because, you've led product, you've led user experience analytics, engineering teams at Booking and Amazon, and also at Cartroller. I mean, was leadership something that you kind of just found? Was that, or did it find you? Was leadership kind of, I mean, again, did you feel like it was a natural kind of, just a very natural course for you to be in a more leadership, more a directing role, managing teams, managing people, and these challenges?
Yeah, I would say, I quoted a little bit earlier that like I was lucky enough to sort of be put forward for roles, either due to my ambitious spirit or sort of my actively seeking camaraderie. Like I'm a very collaborative leader. Believe that nothing is as good as it can be when the sum of the parts and all the rest. But I leadership is something that you learn and you refine over time. Like if you think about the basics of sort of what leadership is, you've got an element of EQ, right? So like you need to understand people. 2, you need to get along with people and, reflect on their perspectives and understand where they're coming from and listen to them and all that kind of thing. And then the third component is like creating that awesome story and that mission that motivates them and something that they can believe in. And I think like EQ in my case, and sort of like that emotional intelligence and desire to connect with people has sort of maybe intuitively always been there. But the piece around how do I understand what it is that we're trying to do? Like, how do I create a compelling story? How do I engage with people that may or may not agree with my viewpoint or how I think about something? I mean, that's a journey, right? And you learn that along the way. There's no like formula to say you've just got it in the bag.
No.
So yeah, I would say parts have been there, but parts are continuously learning. Like I'm still learning.
Yes, listen, I mean,
definitely not a finished article here.
No, but you can see that just in the evolution of where you are and what you're doing, and it's your career up to this point. But I guess, in terms of the leadership, being tapped for a leadership role, I mean, that really, you think that really was more triggered just by people thought, hey, you were a very infectious kind of personality. You could really work well with people. Was there anything more distinctive around why you think you were picked for leadership?
I think you sort of articulated it. Like I mean, you'd kind of have to ask the people that nominated me for for these things as well, because I don't know that I ever actively sought out the feedback as to why I was necessarily appointed or chosen. But I think just that spirit of, sort of knowing that you're not necessarily the best, but you want to work well with people and you want them to do their best work when they show up, and you have that sort of, I suppose, emotional intelligence, like a self-motivating kind of capacity.
Sure.
Maybe that's part of it. Yeah.
Because you've seen people who were bypassed for leadership roles. And you've seen people who probably were quite maybe a bit disappointed or maybe a bit envious that you actually were appointed to more leadership in a leadership spot. I mean, how did you have to deal with some of that stuff and some of the resentment or any of the kind of maybe, so you had
of course.
Anything you could share?
But like I've been on both sides of the coin as well, right? Like let's not pretend here that it's always been perfect and perfectly swimming for me. I think it's leadership also doesn't necessarily need to be appointed, which I think is a core component of sort of understanding what it means to be a leader. And that is that, okay, maybe you didn't get the top position, or you're not, the role that you specifically wanted, but what parts of that can you lead and can you find are going to be, paths for you forward? I think like that's a core component of it as well. It's like, it's a continuum, like anybody that thinks that this is like a one and done kind of thing, like, oh, success, I've reached it, happy days, is just, naive at best. It's, maybe you didn't get that role at that time, or maybe you didn't get to be that decision maker in that moment, but that's okay. Your time will come as long as you continue sort of taking a step back and actually still leading despite, some sort of title or packaged up thing.
But actually being in a leadership role and dealing with very mission critical objectives in a leadership role, did you feel like did those come very natural to you in terms of having to kind of really deal with some real stuff that maybe you felt maybe a bit out of your bandwidth, or how did those mission critical decisions come to fruition given you were now in this kind of new leadership context?
Yeah. Fantastic question. One of my favorites, actually, in some respects, and that I think mission critical decisions are both super exciting, but super burdensome. And that, you are the person that needs to make that decision, and how you choose to make that decision is sort of how good you're going to be in some respects. And I think a lot of time people think of leadership as hierarchy, which is, I was sort of referring to that earlier, or they think of it as, well, I get to make the decision, and they don't necessarily see the accountability or the responsibility behind it. And I think those environments are actually, quite toxic, because you've got people that shouldn't be making decisions, and then you have people that maybe are sort of falsely appointed, right? In the sense that, like, well, we say you can make a decision, but you're not actually making the decision.
That's an excellent point, because I would say, in terms of the environment you've been in, it would be ostensibly, from someone looking from outside in, these are the most progressive, most sophisticated, the most technologically advanced environments. But yet, are they still also composed of some old kind of strictures and structures of kind of traditional ways of looking at leadership? Again, even in those environments, it's still, it's still kind of, let's say, laden with some of those traditional perspectives.
And for me, like, my mental model is making a mission critical, like, or a decision of that caliber kind of decision, means that you have to exercise the due diligence to mean that it's quality, and to make sure that it's people are accountable for it, and that's something that people can believe in. So that's assessing the different personalities, the different perspectives, the different histories, the different risks, the different financial components. I mean, the list goes on.
Yeah.
And that is a huge, huge, huge task and undertaking. And the people that do that can make really quality decisions, but the ones that sort of don't go to that effort, which are appointed and are made decision makers sometimes, then make these decisions that you're sort of navigating around. But I personally, I take it as something like that I'm very specifically accountable for, and I'm not necessarily modeling myself after what others are doing.
Nice.
I'm trying to make sure that that decision is the right one in that moment, through that level of due diligence, because that ultimately wins out.
And so that would, obviously would describe when I just kind of introduced you coming into being very hands-on. And I imagine, but is there any special sauce to this? Do you have a special sauce in terms of how you do this stuff? Or is there a special sauce in this kind of, in the context of mission critical?
Yeah. Great question. I think, to use an old adage, like, context is king. And I think that goes hand in hand with sort of making these decisions and being diligent about the way that you think about something. So whether I'm framing a decision for more senior leaders or for my teams or for what have you, like, the core to making that decision is, how can I lend the appropriate context so that it can be the best decision that we can make as an organization or as a wider company or what have you. And without that context, without that due diligence, without an understanding of all the ins and outs of, like, what types of customers, why this is important to them, why this is financially important, why now, what are the risks we should anticipate, how should we think about this global sphere, you don't have a kind of more holistic understanding of like what the picture actually is, and then you're sort of, navigating blindly. So I take it, yeah, I suppose for me, it's like whether I'm building context for myself, my teams, or leaders, like that is at the core for me.
Are you a risk taker?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, look at me.
Tell us.
I grew up in the States. I've lived in 7 different countries. Like I'm nuts, Yeah, no, I take risks. They're thoughtful and they're calculated risks, I like to think. And I definitely admire people that take risks, and I think, sometimes those risks paid off, sometimes they don't, but ultimately at like the heart of that, you learn from taking a risk in a deep way, right? They say the high risk, high reward thing, but also high risk, no reward. But, there is always a piece and component of learning to that.
Yeah, because you've worked in some pretty wildly complex systems.
Yeah.
From a global seller trusted Amazon to pricing and supply booking. I mean, I guess when you this first move when dealing with senior stakeholders and people are not agreeing and the turnaround is yesterday. I mean, can you shine some light on how you navigated some of those tight spots? I mean, I imagine you've been in them.
Oh yeah. And what I would say is that if I'm in them, I'm not doing my job right.
Okay.
No, I mean, there are times when obviously you walk in new to an organization, or you inherit teams, or you inherit organizations, and you have a new stakeholder mix, or you have senior stakeholders that have never sort of really been on board with something. So the first thing, if we were to just get tactical about it, I would do is I would reframe the context around customers. I say, like, what is the goal that we're trying to achieve for these customers? Like, what is the outcome that we're trying to get to? Why is that important? And that creates sort of a level grounding, right? So divorces people from these kind of solution mindsets and their, special projects and like the way that they want to do something, and instead begs the sort of outcome question, which helps people to sort of creatively, collaboratively derive a solution rather than sort of go in fresh with like, oh, well, I just need to debate this one random point with someone that has more data than the next person. So I think starting from that grounding is super important.
Mm-hmm.
But then just to go back to my earlier point, your role, or like anyone's role in product, mine in particular, like the baseline is earning trust with stakeholders and building relationships. And that means active listening, understanding their perspectives. Why do they care about a certain thing? How does that thing work so that I understand why they care about it? Why is this important versus that? When you say that it's the solution, what's behind that solution so that I can start to break it apart into sort of like the pieces that it needs to be. And all of that diligence and all of that relationship building of credibility over time and trust over time is so core, because then you're able to sort of do the homework, right?
Yeah.
And then walk into a room and have a peaceful conversation, or one where at least you understand where they're coming from, right? So you may disagree, right? We all disagree.
Right.
But at least I understand why that is the case. And then you can sort of go about sort of working back from there. But yeah, so it's twofold, framing things in terms of outcomes and customers to sort of, divorce ourselves from special things.
Sure.
And then also doing the groundwork in terms of getting to know your people and really understanding their perspectives.
And given, I guess, so the interaction with the senior stakeholders is key. But when you have to kind of make a pivot on that roadmap, you've got to make a choice to kind of make a new tack in your direction. How was that something that did you have? Was that one of your biggest challenges maybe in the beginning in terms of how you had to deal with, let's say, the expectations of senior stakeholders and also dealing with this day-to-day tactical reality of what you were facing in terms of the work?
Sure. I mean, I think the learned skill is to articulate value and find out what value means to a specific company. I think oftentimes it's financial, and then that's grounded in terms of a timeline and or cost, right? So like, how long does it take to take this to market? Such that I can realize X financial value for the business. And if I can break that down, the decision becomes a bit clearer. Of course, there's always like the strategic decision and the things that are a little bit longer term in nature, but building that kind of grounding and framework is key to get people to buy into, again, like going back to my point on language, like what is the language with which we're going to make this decision so that we know that we're pivoting in the right direction.
Right. I mean, and also being able to cut through some of that noise.
Yeah.
I mean, and I guess were there any kind of principles that you've kind of held in terms of how you, because, obviously, like we said, in this, you are clearly no finished book. Your journey is just kind of is very much continuing. So are there some principles that you bring with you that you think you've established as how you kind of a bit of a playbook that you operate by that you think really kind of helps you kind of navigate and survive in these ecosystems?
Yeah. So I will readily give the IP over to Amazon on this one. But there are 3, I would say, principles that I live by, particularly with regards to growing product people and product leaders. And the first is the baseline of earning trust. So, if you're not trusted by your colleagues, your peers, your senior stakeholders, your investors, your what have you, like you might as well just like not keep going, right? Like as in there's the fundamental element that people need to believe who you are. You need to be credible and you need to have that trust. So like that's the baseline. And then I think the next 2 are quite interesting. And I would say they're actually rare and hard to find. And that is that you are able to both dive deep, so really, really understand the nitty-gritty of the problem, and then also think big, where you pop up and you make sense of something and you've got, like you're sort of that more intuitive thinker where you go, okay, right, I've got all this detail and I'm going to make sense of it. And I'm going to make it compelling. That's actually really rare. You often find that people are either one or the other. So they're either like sort of diving deep and execution oriented, or they're just like up in the clouds, thinking about the future and that kind of thing. So finding both in one person is really tough, but super core to product, because product is that marriage between understanding the kind of wider context of the business and the future and where technology is going and all of those kinds of things, and like how to articulate a compelling message that people can buy into that don't understand the detail, but also having the detail to be able to understand how the thing works. Like, how would we even go about making this decision to invest in this piece of software or that software, or like how it works such that actually it's more efficient if we did this 3 months earlier than 6 months later, and we did this at this time versus that time.
Sure.
And when you have that nuanced and detailed understanding of something, you make the best decisions. And so yeah, it's those 3 for me.
Yeah, listen, I think that's very important, because I think that kind of top down and bottom up, as I would describe what you're talking about, that kind of very detailed kind of bottom up approach, and also that more top down approach. I mean, you'd have to have that to have it in combination. I think you really would need that in the context of what you're doing. But exactly. I guess also for me, you mentioned 3 things, but of course, you didn't mention, in fact, at least for me, I'm asking, I guess for you being a woman, and being in these contexts and having to kind of deal with taking risks, deal with accountability, dealing with ownership. Yep. Were there anything distinctive that you felt kind of stood out in terms of maybe things that you've had to deal with maybe as a woman in this context, or that you felt maybe you were kind of being looked at a bit more intensely maybe than your other male peers, which let's be honest, I mean, these are pretty heavy male dominated environments, right?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, no, it's a great question and food for thought. I would say, like, generally as human beings, we have the, let's call it habit or propensity to stereotype. We want to make sense of our surroundings. We want to think about different types of people in different ways. And like, that's just part of our behavior, right or wrong. And that certainly applies to the gender dynamic. We have a certain way that we want to see or hear from women versus men by both men and women, by the way.
Yes.
It's not just isolated towards sort of an us and them kind of environment. In fact, like the way that women are perceived by men and women is this tends to be actually pretty much the same in terms of what that gender dynamic represents. But I'll give you a sort of a more tactical or specific example.
Please.
So I think men can often get away with saying something like, "Get me that report on Friday." Whereas the sort of learned nature of how I think about it is women need to be a little bit softer. So first of all, state a reason. So I've got this upcoming important board meeting on Monday. I really need to gather that intel from that report or what have you. And then posing a question. Do you think you could get that to me by close of business Friday so I can work on it, et cetera? So much softer in terms of get it to me versus here's the reason why, here's why it's important to me, and then if you could, right?
But you're
right?
being very cognizant of the
Exactly.
softness.
Yes.
But you would see your
Absolutely.
male colleagues like, hey, just get it to me.
Boom,
Boom.
get it to me. And then, if I were to do the same, I'd be perceived as being a bit aggressive or intensive in terms of my approach. And that's just like part of that softening is part of it. I think like more holistically though, you put a bit of your sheep suit on, you get in there and you write like, okay, I do my diligence. I understand who these people are. I've done my homework before I've walked into the room, and then I'm going to approach it more softly. And when I do that, I'm listened to,
Right.
And I'm respected. And like, I can actually say something bold because I understand where they're coming from and I understand what's bold versus what's not bold and how I can sort of form my path in that. So,
can I be so bold and ask you,
yeah.
between Amazon and booking as a woman?
Yeah.
Did you feel one environment was a bit more supportive, just a bit more, let's say, maybe more conducive for female leadership? I mean, or because of course both firms don't have, let's say, top female leaders, at least visibly. I'm thinking of Jeff Bezos, and I guess the head of Booking.com's a man, but
yeah, no, it's great. And I mean, great given today's context and, programs that are being gotten rid of and all the rest we want.
Yeah. We'll talk about that.
I would say like, there's not one that's better or worse, right? Like, I don't even know how I'd begin assessing better or worse. I think it's more about being different. So in Amazon, one of the grounding factors was that decisions were oftentimes based on merit. You worked hard, and it didn't matter what gender you were or what background, you came from or what have you. They explicitly rooted it out through analytics and understanding, where people were coming from, et cetera, and asking questions that were quite dynamic and tough. And I really appreciated that. And then, in booking, there were all sorts of programs that really celebrated people and put people up on pedestals to sort of have a more active voice, and programs that were in place and things like that. So different ways of doing it.
And I guess, do you have at this point, I mean, for you, what being successful means in these contexts? I mean, your own kind of definition of success and what you would kind of measure as success versus maybe purely just the deliverable or the objective. I mean, does that kind of permeate through it seems like permeate through how you operate and function as a professional, right? I mean,
yeah. So I'm going to go a bit bold here, and we're going to go with
bring it on.
etymology of the word success. So good thing that Latin is no longer a spoken language. But succere means something, it's a succession, like something to come after something, right? And that etymology inherently means that, you've got to make a step forward and you have to make a choice about something. And when you make a choice about something, it means that, you're obviously, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You've made a choice to step forward in a direction. So you've inherently given something up. The idea is that maybe you've given up the better thing or the worst thing or what have you, and that you're learning along the way and that you minimize that cost over time. But like I said before, I think it's very much a continuum. Ice Cube famously quotes, life ain't a track meet, it's a marathon. And I think success is a bit a part of that, right? Like, it's like you don't sort of have this one win and then, you've made it, right? And you're sort of top of your game.
Right.
You are somebody that's continually learning. Right. And like the hope is that over time, you minimize that cost and you make better and better decisions and you're more and more successful. But like, it's a continuum for me.
And I guess you can't talk about this continuum without also talking about the trade-offs.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and that's I see. Oh, yeah. So
So
I mean, and there have been some real, I guess, in your life experience, your professional experience, some real, let's say, trade-offs that you would, I guess, would ascribe maybe more to the ecosystems in which you've worked and things you've had to do just to kind of keep up in those ecosystems, and also just kind of your own personal decisions, just as Deborah, as a person, as a human being. I mean, so I mean, these are two different things. I would think, but how have trade-offs kind of played in your world?
Yeah, I mean, I think we started off this conversation by saying I'm distinctively ambitious, and so I tend to really drive hard, and I push myself quite a bit. I'm a bit of a work hard, play hard kind of person. But
why do I sense that?
But in making those choices, it's been hard. I mean, I've moved country. I suppose 7 times in my life, and I've, left friends and people along the way, back in those countries, and my family included. I'm lucky enough that my husband is super supportive on that journey. I think with that comes, a sense of loss, but also a sense of purpose, and that you're sort of placed with this awesome opportunity, and cool new challenge. And then the question is, do you want to go for it? And do you? And how do you adapt what your current working environment or your current life is looking like to sort of go after that opportunity, and what's exciting about that? And then when do you decide not to take it? But making trade-offs and sort of being in a leadership position is, it's a pretty lonely place, because you sort of have to do a lot of that in your own head. Obviously gather and garner the information, but if you're that decision maker, you have to make that choice.
And people are going to be listening in on this podcast and looking at you and your career and wanting to even emulate someone with your background. I mean, is there anything you'd want to say about the particular industries that you're in and the ecosystems that you've been in that really kind of describe the kind of trade-offs you have to make in the context of working for an Amazon or working for a booking? I mean, are there things about those environments that we just don't know? I mean, that maybe we have this kind of glorified sense of what it may be like working for them, but I mean, you've been in the trenches, so it's good to know.
Yeah, I've been in the trenches. I think holistically we tend to think that success is like this linear journey that, you make one awesome move and then you keep going up and up and up, and it's always getting better and better and better. But that's not it. It's often sideways and horizontal and
Jigsaw.
Sort of down and then back up again. And, the core, and that's again, going back to my point on leadership, just because you're not in that position or you're given that special title, it doesn't mean that you can't lead. How do you lead from the back, or how do you lead from the side, or how do you sort of help yourself to kind of get there? And those are some of the trade-offs in my own head, being an ambitious person who wants to get to the top and, is sees all the benefits of all of those wonderful things, sort of taking a step back and going, actually, what it takes to get there is sort of a bit more humility and taking a different tact, or making this decision to make that decision, and thinking about, again, that outcome
right
that I'm trying to achieve, not the thing in that moment.
And I guess, I think that's really well said. And when you think about, I guess, any distinctive, let's say, leadership dilemmas that you've faced, that you would, something that really kind of stands out, a salient example of something that would maybe kind of describe a dilemma that you've had to deal with in making leadership calls. And
I had one many years ago when I was going through what I would call a zero-based planning process.
Yeah.
So, annual planning for the next year. And effectively, the idea was that entire teams and funding for entire initiatives could be cut, not on a whim, but at a moment's notice. And this was a sort of very real environment where people's jobs, the things that they'd been doing for the last 5 years, were at stake, right? I would say the sort of perspective was, well, you're a product manager, you're a product manager, you're a product manager. But of course, like I said before, context is important. And that lost context when people are flipping from one topic to another topic to another topic isn't just as fluid as we'd all love it to be.
No.
And so in that, I had to really sort of take a step back and go, well, what if my teams, did face some funding cuts, and what would happen, and how would I think about this space? And it went back to that sort of language learning, which was what is the language of the business?
Right.
So that I can then go back to the context that I spoke about to give the appropriate level of context to my leaders so that they can, make the most informed, highest quality decision in this kind of environment. And then exercise a bit of the humility, which is to say, even when I go to all the ends,
yeah,
and I make all that effort, and my teams make that effort, and they understand what we're trying to achieve, how do you then say, well, a decision could be made that I don't like, but I've done my very best, and I've reframed my success around giving the best context possible to ensure that that decision can be made with the best, intel and the way that it's been approached. So yeah, I had this funding process. My teams were cut in the first round.
Okay.
Lots of funding was cut. I didn't believe in it because of my context. And I had to go about the journey of reframing that context for my leadership by going deep into the financials, understanding what the pivot points of these things were, how I could inherently describe that in a credible way, right? Through understanding what the financial impact of each of the initiatives was, framing it up in terms of release timelines, talking about the realized value, working with my FP&A colleagues to speak a credible language, as in if it's signed off, signed, stamped, sealed, delivered by FP&A, then it means that it is a financial estimate that we can all believe in and subscribe to.
Right.
And bringing it about, again, that language to senior leadership so that they could immediately understand what it was that I was talking about and why this value was important, and not just sort of taking a back seat and going, they made a call. It is what it is. I'm going to go have to deliver this team message. And then that made me believe in it. It made my teams believe in it. And also this sort of tough lesson of saying, well, even if it doesn't happen. Now, I was successful enough in that moment. I did get the funding in the end, and that I was actually told that I had the clearest case and it was clear cut and made a lot of sense. And so my teams were delighted, but it could have gone the other way. Like, leaders could have been, either not paying attention to the context, or maybe there was another event or something that I wasn't privy to that meant that their context was different than my context, et cetera. But I think going to that effort, redefining what success was, which is we did our best to provide that context in that moment, and then accepting that, right? And working with it in terms of a path forward.
It's fantastic. That's a really great example, because I think you have to make these calls, and you have to, and you want to also protect your people. I mean, these are real jobs, real lives on the line.
Oh yeah,
and having to kind of really dig and really kind of make the real defensive case to kind of to be able to kind of get the buy-in. But in this case, it was a success.
It was a success.
Have you had any miserable failures?
Yeah.
You want to take a minute to describe one, or?
No, I've had loads where, and I would say they've been moments where you thought something was going to go in a certain way and it didn't, or the process that you were trying to get something over the line, it just took 6 months longer than you were expecting to because you didn't do your homework on this, or people didn't understand where that was coming from. I mean, by no means has it all been perfect, but I think that, again, that framework around how do I try and speak the language of the people around me,
right,
build the context that I believe is going to articulate the value of this initiative, and then accept that there may be other things going on, but that I have done the best I can in this situation to, navigate.
Sure. And I guess has there been any, let's say, being a better leader? Because I imagine, your leadership journey is really just is going to only be kind of gearing up. But we also know you're joining a new firm.
Yeah.
You've recently left booking.
Yeah.
But is there any kind of, let's say, what would maybe describe as an underrated habit that maybe actually makes you a better leader? I mean, is it just your diligence? Is it the due diligence that you do? Is it your passion? Is it just your bubbly nature? How would you describe?
Yeah. I mean, we all look for a silver bullet when we're trying to describe something. What's the thing? And I think it's a combination of all those things you describe, as opposed to this one salient point. But one thing I would say I habitually care about or spend time on is my people. I believe that as a leader, just because I've received the title or I've been given the sort of job to lead X or Y, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm best at that thing, right? The people around me could and are oftentimes much smarter than me. I like to be challenged. I like to see things from different perspectives. And when you harness that and you hire people that are more talented than you, and you get to be a part of the journey of growing them and making them show up to work and doing their best work, especially in a place where they spend most of their time.
Right.
And you're focused on that and you know what it means to grow their careers. I think it's first of all, deeply, deeply rewarding, but also you become that sort of larger than life person, right? Because you can be better than you are as yourself. And that's incredibly powerful.
Well, listen, I mean, I think this has been a great, that's a great answer to the question.
Thanks for the compliments,
yeah, listen, I mean, it's, you really do, the accolades are well deserved,
No,
Deborah.
cheers.
No,
Yeah.
but it's just really nice to know that you've been able to kind of really kind of find this kind of, there's a philosophy. It seems like there's a real kind of a philosophy that you kind of live by, and how you kind of operate, and how you look at your work and the ecosystems that you're operating in. And this next role that you're moving into, anything you wanted to talk about just for a second about what you're stepping into as your next?
Yeah. Super excited. It's going to be a different journey. I'm going to be VP of product, and I will be looking at not the scale journey, but the scaling journey. So I'll be looking at sort of taking things from a different tact. How do we go after market share at pace, get folks accountable, bring things to life at just like sort of incredible speed? And I'm really excited to get back to that. Yeah.
Well, kids at home, here you have it with Deborah Clarke. And listen, this has been a wonderful, wonderful session talking to you, and wishing you the best in your next steps in your career.
Cheers. Thanks so much. Really appreciate the time.
Thank you. We had a great discussion with Deborah Clarke. Please follow us on LinkedIn, Spotify, and YouTube, and Instagram. And you can share this episode with someone who valued these insights. And for more on Control-F, or to contact Systematic 3, reach out to our head of studios, Manuel Supio, and looking forward to seeing you on the next podcast.